Hello, welcome to Alyssa Jean's Reviews, and welcome to my review for Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2, Episode 6, Lost in Translation. A spoiler warning applies if you have not seen the episode, blah blah blah. Okay, so I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as I can. This was a very strong episode. I liked it quite a lot. I'm probably ranking this right now as my second favorite episode of the season. This was the Uhura horror episode that I read about in an article that I read at the beginning of the season, written by a critic who had seen the first 6 episodes, and I got these mixed up. I thought that episode 5 was the Uhura episode and episode 6 was the Spock episode, but as it turns out, this of course was episode 6, and when I read this was a Uhura focused horror episode, I assumed erroneously that it would be about the Gorn because they like to use the Gorn for horror. I think the Gorn are still coming later. This was something different. This reminded me a lot of the Next Generation episode Night Terrors. It was a very similar premise. And Night Terrors is an episode that I like quite a lot. Didn't quite make my top 100 Star Trek episode, but it was in the consideration. It's up there for me. Just didn't quite make my top 100, but it is an episode I've thought more favorably of than disfavorably of. This one, I think, took a similar concept and was even better because it was an excellent Uhura character episode. I think even better than the one she had in season 1, which I think was that asteroid episode. I think this is the best Uhura focused episode we've had, and a lot of great stuff with her and a really strong character journey, dealing with death. She had mentioned her parents' deaths last season, and we learned she's never really faced it, and then dealing with Himmer's death. That was excellent, and I love the use of Kirk here, the first meeting of Kirk and Uhura, and then Kirk and Spock, they focus in on the handshake. Ooh, big moment. But it's okay. That wasn't the focus of the episode. It was Uhura and Kirk. And I don't care what anyone says. I think Paul Wesley is an excellent Kirk. I think he's as good as Kirk as Ethan Peck is with Spock. In both cases, maybe you can't always match up in your brain with the previous version of it. I feel that way about Ethan Peck all the time, and I feel that way sometimes about Paul Wesley, but I think he overall does an excellent Kirk, and I love him, and I think this solidifies that. So all of that is good. I'll talk about Pelia and number 1 a little bit once I get into my review. Let's get into it. Let's get into a little more details really quickly because I don't have a lot of time. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, before I get into the details of the episode, there is a little discussion that I need to have really quickly. And I know I said I didn't have a lot of time, but I need to get this in. I want to talk very briefly about canon because there's a scene in the Menagerie, the original series episode, where Kirk says, I met Captain Pike once when he was promoted to fleet captain. So in order to make that fit into canon, they just threw in this thing about Pike being fleet captain of 2 ships, and it wasn't really that big of a deal, and it didn't really make any sense. And just so they can fit into canon, and so the canon hawks could be satisfied, oh, see, he was fleet captain. That's dumb. Like, it would have been better off just ignoring that line and just having Kirk simply meet Pike and ignore the fleet captain thing, because it's not even really a thing. Like, the fleet captain thing was something that was invented in the very early days of TOS before they had even decided this was Starfleet or the Federation or anything. So I think it is safe to ignore that line, but they satisfied the canon hawks. So I think it would have been better off if they didn't do that. Now, if you're thinking, well, but Alyssa, last week you were getting upset about breaking canon with Spock and Nurse Chapel. Here's the thing. Everyone has their line, I think, that can't be crossed for canon. Everyone has a line. Some people have their line. I call it the canon line. Some people have the line really close to the chest. Like they want the show to follow TOS to the letter. I think that's personally unreasonable. So if those people think that you have to have Kirk meet Pike as the fleet when he becomes the fleet captain, then you have the line really close to you. some people have the line really far out, way out. So people who aren't, I got a commenter on my video last week, people who aren't bothered by like what bothers me, like Spock and Chapel having a relationship they definitely never had. And those people might think they don't have a canon line. You do. Everyone has a canon line. If Spock came in one episode and he suddenly could breathe in outer space and he was flying on a dragon in outer space next to Daenerys Targaryen, and they said that that's how it's always been and this is canon now, you wouldn't be bothered by that. So everyone has a canon line, even if you don't think you do. Because there are certain rules that the show has set up that you have to stick to. You can't just do whatever the fuck you want. You can't say... Kirk is now John T. Kirk, and he's from the planet Beelzebub, and he has pointy ears now. You can't do that. Like, you can't do whatever you want. So, those of you who don't think you have a canon line, you do. Your canon line is just way out there, so they would have to do something really outrageous for it to bother you. But it would bother you because you do need to stick within the rules of your universe. So for me, the canon line... was crossed with Spock and Chapel having a relationship they definitely never had. And as my brother put in his review last week, that he has a hard time matching up in his mind those events to these events and those characters to these characters. And that makes it hard to see it as being the same thing. And it's supposed to be the same thing. So, yeah, so that was across the canon line. But for me, the fleet captain thing, I don't care about that. Like, I think we're better off not doing that. All right. My canon lecture is done. Let's get into this episode. As I said, love this episode. Now, if you don't remember the episode Night Terrors, it was the Enterprise D and another alien ship that they could not see. Was trapped in this rift. What was it, the Tychon's Rift or something? I forget it was. And they were trying to communicate with the Enterprise crew, and so in doing so, they were causing them all to have all these visions and night terrors, because they were no longer getting REM sleep. When you don't get REM sleep, I guess for a little while, then you start having hallucinations. Except for Council Troy, who they were trying to communicate with to tell her that they were trapped. So this isn't exactly that, but it takes elements of that, and then it focuses it all on Uhura, and I think Uhura really was the perfect character for this. And I absolutely loved getting Hammer back. We did hear at the beginning of the year that... Bruce, what's his name? Bruce, whatever his name is, would be returning as Hammer this season in some capacity, and we didn't know how, and here it is, and I think it worked brilliantly to advance that really strong Uhura character arc that I was talking about earlier. And I love the mystery of it, even if it did, maybe I was slightly disappointed that it was something very similar to something that I've seen before, but overall not really that disappointed, because I was invested in this character, and I loved following her throughout this episode, trying to unravel this mystery of what was happening. And I kind of suspected that it might be a Night Terrors type of thing. But you know what? Not everything has to be completely original. I think this episode brings its own unique spin onto that plot, and it's not like it's one of the way overused tropes like the trial or the virus trope or any of that. So I quite enjoyed it. And Celia Gooding, gosh, I'm forgetting her full name. She was amazing in this episode. My only disappointment was at the end, when she was eating or having a drink with Kirk. They showed this jazz band. I wanted her to be singing because I thought that would have been a great tribute to Nichelle Nichols, who was an excellent singer and did so a couple times in Star Trek. But it actually made sense that she wouldn't be. But my brain went to, is she up on stage singing? I just thought it would have been a fitting tribute to Nichelle Nichols, although it wouldn't have made a lot of sense. And the scene that they did with Kirk and horror probably makes more sense. Yeah, as I said, Paul Wesley as Kirk really works for me. I disagree with the detractors. I think he's excellent. I think I love the chemistry with him and Uhura here, and I buy it. I buy that this is how they first met, and that they became friends like very early on, so that later when Kirk becomes captain of the Enterprise, he has this pre-established relationship with Uhura. Now, it's one that doesn't get built up enough, as much as it should have in the original series, because Uhura was just a glorified secretary in the original series and didn't get a lot to do. But by the time we get into the movies, it's very clear that they have a rapport, they have a relationship. So I love seeing that explored in more depth here. And I love that they touched on Leon and Kirk there, and bringing back tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, and her like knowing him but not knowing him, and like dealing with the fact internally that she watched him die but it was not him. So I love that they touched on that. I would have been disappointed if they brought Kirk over the Enterprise and then just ignored that. That wouldn't have made a lot of sense. So that worked for me as well. Now we have Pelia and number one having their little side plot, and I said previously that I wasn't sure how I feel about Pelia. I liked her here. My favorite line was at the beginning of the episode, where she tells Uhura that Hemmer was one of her best students. She's like, "No, I just said that because he died. Actually, he was just okay." I love that brutal honesty. I think that's what I love about this character. I think that's why I'm buying her now, is that she just direct and cuts under the bullshit, and I love characters like that. I'm trying to think of another. Odo, in a different way, did that on Deep Space Nine. He was obviously a very different kind of character, but he was also good at cutting through the bullshit. Yeah, any characters that can cut through the bullshit, I'm on board. And then we find out at the end that Una also was struggling with Hemmer's death. Uhura and Hemmer definitely was established. Number one in Hemmer, I think we're kind of almost in the territory of Arium from Star Trek Discovery. Not anywhere near as bad as that, where they had this like 10-minute funeral scene and it was not earned at all. And all those crew members were so sad, and they had this attachment to her connection to her that we were told about and not shown. So with Una, I think that kind of is the case. Not with Uhura, because that relationship was established. But I still did enjoy the back and forths and the conversations and the relationship between Pelia and Una. So overall, I'm not that bothered by it. But yeah, and it also wasn't as focused on in this episode as the Uhura and Hemmer. And oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, I thought it was a really nice scene at the end where the aliens are able to communicate to Uhura that everything's okay by showing them the fully, okay Hemmer, not the creepy zombie Hemmer, and then Hemmer nods, and like I thought that was a very touching scene. I thought that was a really perfect way to wrap up the episode and for the aliens to show, yeah, everything is okay now. I actually thought it almost gave me a little bit of a tear. Like it was a very touching scene. So I really love that. And I'm all over the place here, but but I did also forget to mention the horror aspect of this episode, which they didn't. I don't think they dove too heavy into that, but when they were using the horror aspects, particularly towards the beginning of the episode with the zombie Hemmer and things like that, I think it was very effective. So I should also mention that. Okay, so I need to get out of here, so let me go ahead and give my rating out of 10. So 1's the lowest possible score, 10's the highest possible score. My rating out of 10 for season 2, episode 6 is an 8.5. Just not quite a 9 because tomorrow was a 9, and it's still my favorite episode of the season. Maybe in retrospect I'll bump that one up to a 10 and this one up to a 9. I don't know. But for now I'm giving this an 8.5, an excellent episode, really strong a horror episode. Love this episode. So an 8.5 out of 10. Okay, thank you so much for joining me. Next week, we finally get the highly anticipated Lower Decks episode. I hope it isn't a disappointment. I just can't wait to see what they're going to do with that. So I will be here to review that. I've got Star Trek Top 100 videos up on my channel. Please subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you really soon. Goodbye, everybody. Bye.